You turned 30, and the world expected a version of you that looked successful, put together, energized, maybe even thriving. But inside, you felt like a ghost, not broken, not in crisis, but slowly fading into something unrecognizable. You didn't scream for help. You didn't collapse in a dramatic heap on the floor. Instead, your soul began to dim, one silent degree at a time. You still smiled. You still showed up. You still said, "I'm fine." But the truth was, you weren't, and you hadn't been for a while. You used to wake up with a plan, a pulse, a reason. Now mornings felt like standing at the bottom of a hill that kept getting taller. Just the thought of starting made you tired. Not the sleepy kind of tired. No, this was deeper. This was the kind of tired that sleep couldn't touch. The kind of tired that clung to your bones and sat behind your eyes. And it wasn't just fatigue. It was something quieter, more dangerous. You couldn't remember the last time you felt joy. Not the kind you post, not the kind you fake, but the kind that lives quietly in your chest. You stopped laughing, not because things weren't funny, but because the spark that used to rise effortlessly had disappeared. And still, no one noticed, because you'd become so good at wearing the costume, at performing okay, at nodding when others vented, smiling at the right time, giving advice you couldn't take yourself. You were everyone's rock, the dependable one, the strong one. But strength, when stretched too far for too long, doesn't break loudly. It crumbles inward, soundless, invisible. And that's what you were doing. Crumbling, piece by piece, smile by smile. Yes, by silent no. Until one morning, you sat at the edge of your bed, feet on the floor, and something inside you whispered, "I don't want to do this anymore." It wasn't a cry for help. It wasn't even dramatic. It was a murmur, soft, tired, honest, a whisper from the parts of you that hadn't been heard in a very long time. You rubbed your eyes, looked at your phone, checked the time, and even then, you still stood up. You still got dressed. You still went to work. Because that's what you do, right? You show up, even when you're unraveling inside. But that whisper didn't leave. It stayed with you, in the background of every meeting, every errand, every hollow smile. You tried to outrun it. You tried productivity, positivity, caffeine, planning, exercising, journaling, praying. You tried pretending it wasn't real. But you can't outwork emptiness. You can't hustle your way out of a heart that's exhausted. You can only pause. You can only listen. And that's what began to happen next. Not all at once, not overnight, but slowly, gently, you started to hear yourself again. You didn't know it at the time, but your body had been whispering to you long before that morning. The signs were there. You just didn't recognize them, or maybe you did, and dismissed them. Because that's what you were taught to do. Push through, be grateful, keep going. But let's go back. Let's revisit the quiet alarms your soul set off, the ones you silenced to survive. You woke up tired, no matter how much you slept. You chalked it up to bad sleep, late night scrolling, stress, hormones, anything but what it really was, emotional depletion. You thought more sleep would fix it, so you tried longer weekends, slower mornings, but the exhaustion didn't lift. Because this wasn't physical fatigue. It was soul fatigue. And soul fatigue doesn't heal with naps. It heals with truth. You couldn't focus, even on things you used to enjoy. You'd open a book and read the same sentence 5 times. You'd watch a movie but forget the plot halfway through. Even texting friends back became too much. And still, you told yourself, "I'm just distracted. I'm just tired. I'll snap out of it." But deep down, you knew. Your mind was waving a white flag. You weren't just overstimulated, you were overwhelmed. You filled every quiet moment with noise. Silence started to feel dangerous, so you filled it with TikTok, with Reels, with YouTube videos about other people's lives so you didn't have to sit with your own. The moment the room got still, your anxiety turned up the volume. What are you even doing with your life? Why can't you just be normal? Everyone else is handling it. So instead of facing the questions, you scrolled. Because numbness felt safer than truth. You said, "I'm fine," so often you forgot what truth sounded like. Even when your voice shook, even when your chest ached, even when your soul begged for rest. You smiled. You said, "It's just a busy season." You laughed off your own unraveling. Because if you slowed down, if you told the truth, you were afraid of what might come out. And so, you kept going. You ignored the signs. You quieted your truth. Until the signs stopped whispering and started screaming. And still, you didn't break. You didn't collapse. You simply slipped away a little more each day. From others. From joy. From yourself. That was burnout. Not the way people describe it. Not with chaos and sobbing and snapping at coworkers. No. This was high-functioning burnout. The silent kind. The socially acceptable kind. The kind that hides in plain sight behind, "I'm just tired. I'm just busy. It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. Everything your body had been carrying. Everything your mind had been suppressing. Everything your heart was no longer willing to pretend didn't hurt. And once you saw it, really saw it, you couldn't unsee it. You knew, this isn't who I am. This isn't what I want. This isn't sustainable. And that's where healing began. Not in fixing, not in productivity, but in the brave decision to stop pretending. You didn't know how to rest. Not really. You thought rest meant scrolling in bed, taking a long weekend, ordering takeout, watching comfort shows. But those things didn't bring you peace. They brought distraction, temporary relief, a pause button, not a reset. You never actually felt rested, just postponed. Because resting while feeling guilty isn't rest at all. For so long, you'd tied your worth to your output, your usefulness, your availability, your ability to keep moving no matter what. You learned to celebrate exhaustion. You wore burnout like a badge. You believed tired meant important. Busy meant successful. So the moment you slowed down, the voice in your head got loud. You're falling behind. Everyone else is doing more. You're being lazy. But you weren't lazy. You were empty, running on fumes, trying to pour from a dry well. And slowly, you started to question that voice. You started to ask, what if rest isn't a reward I have to earn? What if I'm allowed to stop, just because I need to? That's when something began to shift. One afternoon, you said no. No to a last-minute request. No to an invitation you didn't have the energy for. No to showing up when your tank was already dry. And you felt guilty. Then scared. Then a strange sense of relief. You didn't collapse. The world didn't implode. No one screamed at you. You said no, and you were okay. That moment cracked something open. You realized that maybe, just maybe, you had permission to put yourself first. Not in a selfish way, in a human way. So you started exploring what real rest felt like. Not the performance of rest, not productivity in disguise, not squeezing in a quick meditation to optimize your energy, but slow, intentional being. You turned off your phone, you lay on the floor, you listened to your own breathing, you felt your body ache, and didn't run from it. You cried, not because you were falling apart, but because you were finally safe enough to let go. That was real rest. And at first, it was terrifying. Stillness felt like a threat. Quiet felt unsafe. Because in those spaces, the truth surfaced. I've been so tired for so long, and no one noticed. Not even me. But you kept returning to that stillness, little by little. Not because it was easy, but because it was the only way back to yourself. And something else happened. In the quiet, you heard a new voice. Not the guilt, not the shame, but something softer. It's okay to pause. You're allowed to rest. You don't have to prove anything to be worthy. And it didn't speak loud. It didn't demand. It didn't judge. It simply sat beside you, like a friend you didn't know you needed. That voice, that inner gentleness, was the part of you that had been waiting, patiently, quietly, lovingly, for you to come home. And you began to realize, rest isn't the opposite of progress. Rest is progress. Because healing doesn't happen in motion. It happens in stillness, in slowness, in surrender. Once you gave yourself permission to rest, really rest, a quiet question began to surface. What kind of life do I want to come back to? Because you knew now you couldn't return to the one you had before. The version of life that drained you. That demanded everything. That taught you to wear your burnout like it was normal. No, you couldn't go back there. So you started over. Not all at once. Not with dramatic changes, but with small, deliberate reimagining. You asked yourself questions you had once been too busy to ask. What actually gives me energy? What parts of my routine are rooted in fear, not joy? Who in my life makes me feel safe? And who just makes me feel responsible? And slowly, gently, you started editing your world. You let go of the commitments that didn't align. You began saying no without apology. You stopped explaining your rest, as if it needed to be justified. You even looked at your career differently. The version of success you once chased now seemed hollow. You used to believe success was endless motion. But now, success looked like stillness without guilt, peace without pressure, purpose without depletion. You noticed how much of your identity had been built on proving, producing, performing, so you tore it down, brick by brick, not with bitterness, but with tenderness. You forgave yourself for choosing survival when you didn't know better, for staying too long in places that didn't nourish you, for abandoning your needs in the name of being the strong one. And then, you began the work of rebuilding, this time with different materials, boundaries, intentional slowness, radical honesty, gentle mornings, quiet evenings, enoughness. You started showing up as a softer version of yourself, not because you were weaker, but because you were more whole. You didn't need to dominate the room anymore. You didn't need to answer every message within seconds. You didn't need to carry everyone else's chaos just to feel valuable. You started protecting your peace like it was sacred, because it was. And the more you honored your peace, the more life responded. The right people stayed. The wrong ones quietly faded. The right work slowly found you. The kind that didn't require you to abandon yourself just to keep up. And maybe most importantly, you started trusting your own pace. No more chasing, no more proving, just living, breathing, being. And still, you weren't done healing. Because healing isn't a straight line, it's a rhythm. Some days you soared, other days you sank. But even on the low days, you never forgot what burnout taught you. That your value isn't in how much you do. It's in who you are when you're finally allowed to be. By now, you don't need to rush. You don't need to prove. You've learned that healing has no deadline, and you've stopped asking yourself to move faster than your soul is ready. But sometimes, on quiet evenings, when the sky turns that soft blue-gray, when the world outside grows still, a whisper returns. Not the old voice, the harsh one. Not guilt, not shame, but the whisper that saved you. The one that said, "This isn't working. You're allowed to stop. You deserve more than this." that whisper still visits you, not to warn you, but to remind you of who you've become. Because now, you recognize the signs. You notice when your shoulders begin to tighten, when your breath grows shallow, when your calendar fills too quickly. You catch the old patterns, the people-pleasing, the overworking, the subtle ways you try to earn rest again. But this time, you meet those moments with compassion, not judgment. You ask yourself gently, am I abandoning myself right now? Am I crossing my own boundaries just to make someone else comfortable? Is this who I want to be? And sometimes you still stumble, because healing isn't about being perfect. It's about returning, again and again and again, to the place inside you that knows you are already enough. So now, when life grows loud, when pressure begins to rise, you don't reach for productivity. You reach for presence. You put your hand on your chest. You breathe deeper. You light a candle. You open a window. You turn inward, and you listen for the whisper. It tells you, you don't have to go back to the version of you who lived exhausted. You can choose something different every single day. You can rest, even if nothing is finished. You are allowed to protect your softness. You are still worthy, even in your slowness. Because now, you're not surviving. You're living at your own pace, in your own way, with a nervous system that feels safe inside your own skin. You've built a life where peace isn't a vacation. It's a rhythm, a boundary, a home. You've become someone who listens to your body, not fights it. Someone who honors your no as deeply as your yes. Someone who no longer fears rest. Because you've seen what happens when you live without it. And maybe the most beautiful part of it all is that now, when someone else says, I'm just tired all the time, or I don't feel like myself anymore, you don't rush in with advice. You don't try to fix them. You simply say, I've been there. I see you. You're not broken. You're just tired. And sometimes, that's all someone needs. Just like it was all you needed on the day you sat quietly and finally listened to that whisper. So now, here we are. You, here, still breathing. You didn't fix yourself. You didn't force a breakthrough. You didn't rise from the ashes in some dramatic blaze. You just came back, bit by bit, breath by breath. And in a world that taught you to disappear, you made the gentle, quiet decision to stay. That matters. You matter. So tonight, wrap yourself in silence. Breathe slower. Soften your eyes. Let your shoulders fall. No one needs anything from you here. This is your space, your time, your rhythm, and I'll be right here. Whenever you forget the way back to yourself, just listen for the whisper. Shh. You're home now.